mean, what do you want to tell you? What do you want me to tell you?
I have a video.
Well, I wasn't there. So
Today we look at 3 cold cases solved with insane plot twists from New York that will leave you speechless. Number 1, the heartbreaking case of Etan Patz. The disappearance of 6-year-old Etan Patz in 1979 is one of the most high-profile child abduction cases in the history of the United States. The case rocked New York City and shocked the nation, leading to a massive search effort and a nationwide push for increased child safety measures. Etan Patz was a 6-year-old boy who lived with his family in the Soho neighborhood of New York City. On May 25, 1979, Etan's parents allowed him to walk alone to the bus stop for the first time. He never arrived at school that day and was never seen again. When he didn't return home from school that afternoon, his parents Julie and Stanley reported him missing. In the immediate aftermath of Etan's disappearance, the New York City Police Department conducted a massive search effort, with thousands of volunteers and law enforcement officials scouring the city for any trace of the missing boy. However, despite the enormous resources devoted to the search, no solid leads emerged. Despite a massive nationwide search effort, Etan could not be found, and police were unable to find any answers as to who was responsible. Jose Ramos, a friend of Etan's former babysitter who was detained in the 1980s on unrelated child molestation accusations in Pennsylvania, was the main suspect throughout the majority of the investigation. When questioned while in custody, he admitted to kidnapping and raping a little child who fit his description the same day of Etan's abduction. He just said he was 90% sure it was Etan, not saying who it was precisely. He added that he had left the youngster alive thereafter, so unlike Etan, the boy probably had the opportunity to go home. This 90% confession presented a challenge because there was no solid evidence connecting Ramos to the murder. Ramos further suggested that he may be involved when, in 1991, he boasted to another prisoner that he knew intimate details of Etan's disappearance, but authorities were unable to establish a case against him, and he was never prosecuted. Etan's case remained unsolved for decades and became one of the most famous cold cases in American history. Etan's parents filed a civil suit against Ramos in 2004 and won $2 million in damages. However, the criminal case was still left technically unsolved. 31 years after the disappearance, the investigation was reopened in 2010, and 2 years later, police excavated the foundation of a home owned by one of the Patz's neighbors. Although the search turned up nothing, it attracted a lot of media attention and led to an increase in calls and information concerning the case. Luckily, one tipster finally led authorities in the direction of Pedro Hernandez, who was an 18-year-old stock boy at the bodega next to Etan's bus stop at the time of the kidnapping. According to the tip, Hernandez previously admitted to murdering a little kid in 1982 as he was participating in an open confessional at his church. When Hernandez's brother-in-law and wife were questioned by police about the event, they confirmed the account and said that the church confession had been an ongoing open family secret that had been nervously discussed once again with news of the basement excavation. Hernandez later admitted to inviting Etan inside the bodega, strangling him, and leaving his deceased body in the trash when he was interrogated in 2015. Due to the lack of a body and the defense citing mental evaluations that revealed Hernandez may have had several mental problems that would have contaminated his confession, the first trial was ruled a mistrial after the jury deadlocked at an 11-1 result. However, the second jury in Hernandez's retrial found him guilty of kidnapping and murder. Hernandez was given a sentence of 25 years to life in federal prison on April 18, 2017, following a failed appeal. In a statement after the verdict, the Patz family said, "The tragedy of Etan's loss will always be with us, but today we have finally found some measure of justice for our wonderful little boy." The disappearance of Etan Patz formed a significant turning point in child abduction investigations. Because of Julie and Stanley Patz's tireless search efforts, it was one of the first situations involving missing children to organize a national press campaign. Etan was the first missing child whose image appeared on milk cartons, and photos and contact information were published on posters, newspapers, and television broadcasts. The day of May 25th was designated as National Missing Children's Day by President Ronald Reagan in 1983. on the 4th anniversary of Etan's kidnapping. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded in an effort to spread awareness about child predators and stop tragedies like Etan's case and the abduction of numerous other children across the United States. Etan Patz's father's words to the killer were, "I will never forgive you." Number 2, the $1 million murder case of George Kogan. George Kogan was a wealthy New York real estate developer whose life was cut short in a shocking and brutal way. His murder captivated the city in the 1990s and has remained a topic of discussion and speculation for decades. George Kogan was born in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. He worked hard to build his fortune, starting as a used car salesman and eventually becoming a successful real estate developer. He married his second wife, Barbara, in 1976. And they had one child together, a son named James. In the early 1990s, Kogan was living in a luxurious apartment on East 69th Street in Manhattan. He was a well-known figure in New York's social scene, often attending high-end events and rubbing shoulders with celebrities. In the early morning hours of October 23, 1990, a passerby discovered the body of millionaire George Kogan lying in a pool of blood on a Manhattan sidewalk. The news of the prominent businessman's murder shook the city, and police quickly began investigating the case. Barbara Kogan claimed that she was in her apartment at the time of the shooting and that she had no involvement in the crime. As detectives delved into Kogan's life, they uncovered a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. Kogan had been married to his wife, Barbara, for over 20 years, but their marriage was far from happy. The couple had been estranged for several years, and George Kogan had begun a relationship with a younger woman named Mary Louise Hawkins. Hawkins was a former model and actress. Mary Louise Hawkins was the one who found George dead in a pool of blood. She had met Kogan at a restaurant in New York City, and the two had quickly fallen in love. However, Kogan's wife, Barbara, was not willing to let him go without a fight. She had reportedly hired private investigators to follow Kogan and Hawkins, and had threatened to ruin his reputation and take all of his money if he left her. As police continued their investigation, they began to focus their attention on Barbara Kogan as a suspect in her husband's murder. It was discovered that she had taken out a $4 million life insurance policy on her husband just weeks before his death, and had been heard making comments about how she would be better off without him. However, there was not enough evidence to convict her, and the case went cold. Barbara had moved overseas and started a new life with the money. However, 20 years after the murder, the truth finally came out. Barbara Kogan hired a hitman to carry out the murder, was paid $100,000 to kill Kogan, and had reportedly followed him to a restaurant before shooting him in the back of the head as he left. She was arrested in 2008 and pleaded guilty in 2010 to conspiracy to commit murder and grand larceny. She was sentenced to 12 to 36 years in prison for the murder of her husband, George Kogan. She was released in 2020 after serving 12 years of her sentence due to good behavior and other factors. A lot of people were not happy with her release. Barbara Kogan was referred to as the Black Widow because during her trial, Barbara often wore all black clothing, which was seen as a symbol of mourning and grief. This, coupled with the fact that she had been accused of killing her wealthy husband, gave her that nickname. Number 3, the bizarre case of Tom Kolman. Tom Kolman got up one morning in November 2011 to go to the gym as usual, but he didn't show up at work later that day. That was after spending the previous Thanksgiving holiday with family and watching football. On November 29th, 2011, Linda Kolman, Tom's wife, decided to check to see whether her husband had lost track of time at the gym when he failed to show up for work. The couple resided in a community that supported families in New York's Hudson Valley. Tom has 2 teenagers, Bradley and Jillian, from a previous marriage to Michelle Weber Kolman, who was also his ex-wife. He and Linda also have a son together. Linda, who worked as a hospital administrator, went to the Planet Fitness gym that her husband frequented before work. She discovered his car in the parking lot. Tom's body was lying back in the car's front seat. According to his wife, at first glance, he appeared to be dozing off. She ultimately discovered that her 44-year-old husband was dead. Horrified, she called the police. Recalling the scene, Linda said, "His hands were really, really cold, and then I realized his nails were blue." One thing stood out to the investigators when they arrived. Tom's car was parked further away from the gym, not next to it. Police first believed the 44-year-old had suffered a heart attack, but after doing some further investigation, they began to wonder if there was more to the man's untimely passing. Midazolam, a sedative frequently used by dentists and medical professionals, was discovered in Tom's system. However, the amount was too little to be fatal unless combined with another substance. Security footage from the parking lot also showed that a car had driven up to Tom Kolman's vehicle nearly a half hour before his death. A car that resembled a local who was respected in the area, who was none other than a local dentist named Dr. Gilberto Nunez. Police questioned Nunez, who had raced to the scene that morning after Tom's body was found. They interviewed Nunez about the car that looked identical to his driving up to Tom's vehicle prior to his death, and this is how it went.
But if I look you dead in the eye and I tell you that I know you were there.
then I'm telling you that you don't know, because it's not true.
Okay. So you think I lied?
Well, I think you are lying to me, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
Why would we lie? Why would I lie about that?
Oh, I don't know, because you guys are doing an investigation, so you're trying to find out, if I was there or I wasn't there or whatever.
So the videos are the videos are lies?
I guess so. I have to
Oh,
see them.
come on, Gil. I mean,
I wasn't there. I mean, what do you want to tell you? What do you want me to tell
we
you?
have it on video.
Well, I wasn't there. So if
Well, then you had- you were twin
if
brothers?
there's a clone of me
You have
that
twin
decided to
brothers?
go up there, he was there, but not me. Definitely not. I was not there. I went from my apartment, which is upstairs from my office, into my office to work that morning. That was it. I was not there. So I don't know,
He stuck with his story that he wasn't there, and even though police had CCTV of a car that looked like his driven up to Tom, they could not prove that that was actually him. However, later in the interrogation, he dropped the bombshell news that he'd been having an 11-month affair with Tom's wife. While driving their children to karate classes in 2010, they grew close since Linda and Tom were experiencing problems with their marriage. Interestingly, Tom didn't force Linda to quit the relationship when he learned about the affair. Instead, the two men remained friends. However, as police continued to dive into the life of Nunez, they discovered vials of the same sedative that was in Tom's system in Nunez's practice, which he initially denied any knowledge of having. As the evidence stacked up against him, a detective told Dateline, "We have a gentleman who's friends with the family, is having an affair with the wife, and drives the same vehicle that we have on video." Despite Linda's initial denial, she soon developed suspicions that Nunez was responsible for her husband's death. Nunez was the one who, anonymously, informed Tom about the relationship. Nunez had even purchased Linda a ring as a sign that he desired a serious relationship with her, even though Linda had made the decision to try her marriage once more. Though he and Linda had become intimate, Dr. Nunez said that since she didn't want to leave her husband, he decided to pose as a woman named Samantha, and he sent photos to Tom that revealed the affair. Later, Dr. Nunez claimed that he was connected to the CIA and could assist Tom and Linda Coleman in identifying the person who sent of the sexual images. Dr. Nunez claimed that after his plan failed, he told Tom that he had sent the images and then pleaded for forgiveness. In the days and weeks leading up to Tom's passing, the two remained close friends and frequently texted one another. Nunez refuses to undergo a polygraph test to demonstrate his innocence as well. Other supporting evidence was questionable. Tom was discovered with his seat back up, shirt down, and belt unbuckled. On the inside of the belt, the DNA of a man, not Nunez, was discovered. No arrests were made and the case went cold. 4 years later, the case was reopened, however. During the 4 years, Nunez got to continue to practice dentistry and even got married in 2014. The teenage children that Tom had with his ex-wife Michelle were having a hard time accepting their father's passing. His son Bradley, who was 18 at the time, committed suicide 3 months after the first anniversary. In 2015, Dr. Nunez was arrested on charges of second-degree murder. His defense argued that Tom really died from a heart attack and that he had been in poor health prior to his death. The prosecution claimed that the amount of midazolam proved lethal for Tom because he had sleep apnea. As for the car that was caught on camera in the parking lot, the defense said that the footage was too grainy and far away to prove that it was Dr. Nunez's vehicle. In June of 2016, Dr. Nunez was acquitted of second-degree murder, but he was convicted of felony forgery charges for the CIA documents he created and showed to the Kolmans. He was later convicted of charges of insurance fraud and perjury for 2 unrelated cases. He was sentenced to 2 to 7 years in prison, but he was released from a medium-security prison in September of 2018. Dr. Nunez will reportedly remain on parole until October of 2023. He is unable to return to his dental practice.